Have you ever felt like the person you used to be has suddenly disappeared? The dreams that once excited you, gone quiet. The goals that once pulled you out of bed, that once felt like oxygen, gone still. And the identity you spent years constructing, brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice. It's not falling, it's dissolving, slowly, silently. Like sand slipping through fingers you didn't even realize were open. Everyone around you says the same things: stay positive, push through, bounce back, move on. And you nod, because that's what you're supposed to do. But somewhere underneath the nodding, a quieter voice is asking a very different question. What if they're wrong? What if this isn't failure at all? Take a breath right now, a real one. In through the nose and notice, just notice, how your body already knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Because the confusion you feel, the loneliness that shows up uninvited at 2 a.m., the emptiness that swallows rooms you used to feel safe in, even the pain you keep trying to outrun. What if none of that is evidence that you're breaking down? What if it's evidence that something ancient and intelligent inside you is finally waking up? Sometimes life doesn't destroy you. It destroys the version of you that was never meant to survive. And once you understand what's actually happening beneath the surface of your own collapse, you will never fear your darkest season again. Let's go there together. Slowly. Honestly, because what you're about to hear may be the very thing your unconscious mind has been trying to tell you for years. There is a moment, and if you're here, you already know it, when the floor of your life quietly gives way. Not all at once, like an explosion, but like erosion, a slow disappearing. You wake up one day and the job that used to define you feels like a costume. The relationships that used to anchor you feel like conversations with strangers. The mirror shows a face you technically recognize, but something behind the eyes has changed, or maybe something behind the eyes has finally been revealed. Most people call this a breakdown, and they treat it like a malfunction, a glitch in an otherwise functioning machine. Something to be fixed, medicated, distracted from, or willed away with enough hustle and enough positive thinking. But what if the language itself is the problem? What if calling it a breakdown is like calling a caterpillar's dissolution inside the chrysalis a tragedy, when it is in fact the only path toward wings? Carl Jung spent much of his life studying exactly this phenomenon. He called it, among other things, the dark night of the soul, though the phrase itself is older, borrowed from mystics who understood something modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. Jung believed that the psyche does not break for no reason. It breaks because it is outgrowing a structure that has become too small to contain it. Imagine a snake that has grown too large for its own skin. The skin does not betray the snake. The skin simply cannot stretch any further. Something has to give. What has to give in you is the false self, the persona. The mask you built, often unconsciously, often as a child, in order to be loved, to be safe, to be accepted by people who could not hold the fullness of who you actually were. That mask worked. For a while. It got you through school, through relationships, through the expectations of family, culture, and survival. But masks are not meant to last forever. And somewhere along the way, the pressure of pretending began to outweigh the safety it once provided. This is why your motivation disappeared. Not because you became lazy. Not because you became weak. Your unconscious mind, the deepest and oldest part of you, withdrew its energy from a life that no longer matched who you actually are. Think about that for a moment. Let it settle into your body. Your loss of motivation was never a flaw.
It was an act of self-preservation from a part of you that is wiser than your conscious mind will ever fully understand.
And here is the curiosity that should be forming quietly in your chest right now. What if this collapse, the one you have been dreading, resisting, apologizing for, is actually the greatest opportunity your life has ever offered you? Let that question stay open. Don't rush to answer it yet. Just let it hover, the way a held breath hovers right before release. Because to understand what's happening, we first have to understand what's dying. And it isn't you. The persona, in Jungian terms, is the social mask, the curated identity you present to the world. It is not inherently evil. In fact, it's necessary. We all need some version of a persona to function in society, to hold a job, to maintain relationships, to move through the world without exposing every raw nerve to every passing stranger. The danger isn't in having a persona. The danger is in mistaking the mask for your face. somewhere along the way, many of us forget where the persona ends and the self begins. We become so skilled at performing competence, performing happiness, performing certainty, that we lose the thread back to what's real underneath it all. And the psyche, again, being far more intelligent than we give it credit for, eventually stages an intervention. It doesn't ask permission. It simply begins to withdraw its cooperation from the performance. This is why, when the collapse begins, so many people make the same critical mistake. They try to rebuild the old self. They try to force the motivation back. They try to convince themselves to feel excited about the goals that no longer resonate, to reconnect with the identity that no longer fits. And it never works, because you cannot resurrect a self that was never fully yours to begin with. You can only grieve it and let it go. This is where the real terror lives. Not in the sadness, not even in the confusion. The deepest fear during this collapse is the fear of not knowing who you are without the mask. If I am not my job title, who am I? If I am not the person everyone expects me to be, what's left? If I let go of the identity I built my entire life around, will there be anything underneath it at all? Sit with that fear for a moment instead of running from it. Because right there, in that terrifying blank space, is where the real you has been waiting the entire time. Jung had a word for the parts of ourselves we push into the dark in order to maintain the persona. He called it the shadow, and this is where your breakdown becomes something far more profound than sadness or confusion. This is where your shadow begins to speak. The shadow is not evil, despite how frightening it feels when it first surfaces. The shadow is simply everything you were taught was unacceptable to feel, to want, or to express. Your rage, when you were told to be calm. Your grief, when you were told to be strong. Your desire, when you were told to be modest. Your ambition, when you were told to be humble. Every one of these disowned parts doesn't disappear when you suppress it. It goes underground, and it waits. This is why, during a psychological collapse, emotions that once felt manageable suddenly feel like they could swallow you whole. Anger that seems to come from nowhere. Jealousy that shames you the moment you feel it. Anxiety that hums beneath every quiet moment, like a frequency you can't turn off. These are not signs that you are losing control. These are messages, arriving all at once, from a part of yourself you have been silencing for years. Most people, when the shadow speaks, do exactly what they've always done. They suppress it further. They distract themselves. They numb it with noise, with substances, with relentless productivity, with anything that promises to make the discomfort stop. But suppression only delays the reckoning. It does not prevent it. And here is the profound reversal that changes everything. If you let it, the moment you stop running from these feelings, and instead turn toward them, really turn toward them, with curiosity instead of judgment, something extraordinary begins to happen. The very darkness you feared becomes the doorway to a freedom you didn't know was possible. Not because the darkness disappears, but because you finally stop being afraid of your own depths. Notice, right now as you're listening to this, whether there's a feeling in your body you've been avoiding. You don't have to name it. You don't have to fix it. Just notice it. Let it exist for a moment without pushing it away. That single act, that small act of allowing, is the beginning of everything we're about to explore. Because after the mask falls, and after the shadow speaks, something else begins to happen. Something quieter. Something most people mistake for punishment, but is in truth sacred. You begin to feel unbearably alone, and that aloneness is not the end of your story. It's the doorway into the next one. It's the doorway into the next one. There is a particular kind of loneliness that arrives during this season, and it doesn't feel like ordinary loneliness. Ordinary loneliness comes from missing people. This loneliness comes from something else, entirely. It comes from the growing distance between who you're becoming and the life you built as someone else. And that distance, however painful, is not a malfunction. It is the exact shape of your growth. Notice what happens during this stage. Conversations that used to feel effortless now feel hollow. Friendships that once felt essential now feel like ill-fitting clothes. Rooms full of people leave you feeling more isolated than solitude ever could. This isn't you becoming cold or bitter or broken. This is your psyche quietly recalibrating, sensing which connections were built around the mask, and which connections, if any, were built around the truth underneath it. Jung believed that individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are beneath every layer of conditioning, cannot happen in a crowd. It requires withdrawal. Not permanent isolation, not abandonment of the world, but a temporary retreat inward, a sacred pause where the noise of other people's expectations finally quiets down enough for you to hear your own voice again. Perhaps for the first time in years, think about every transformation that matters in nature. The seed does its most important work in complete darkness, underground, unseen. The chrysalis does its work sealed away, hidden from the world. Even the body, in its deepest healing, does its repair work in sleep, in stillness, away from stimulation. Why would the psyche be any different? Why would you expect your own transformation to happen in the middle of noise, obligation, and performance? This is why solitude during this season is not punishment. It is preparation. The silence isn't empty, it's fertile. And if you can let yourself stay in it, rather than filling it with distraction, the moment it becomes uncomfortable, you will find that solitude begins to feel less like exile and more like homecoming. But let's be honest about something. Understanding this intellectually does not make the pain disappear. Knowing that your suffering has purpose does not make the nights shorter or the ache lighter. So let's talk about the pain itself. Because pain, in this process, is not simply something to endure, it is something to work with. Here is a truth that changes everything once it's fully understood. Pain is not the enemy of transformation. Pain is the raw energy of transformation unshaped. The same intensity that can destroy you, if left unconscious and unexamined, is the same intensity that can rebuild you, if you learn to work with it rather than against it. Suffering doesn't automatically transform anyone. Plenty of people suffer their entire lives and remain exactly the same, bitter, closed, smaller with every wound. The difference between suffering that destroys and suffering that transforms is not the intensity of the pain. It's the quality of attention you bring to it. This is where a subtle but powerful shift becomes possible. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin asking, "What is this trying to show me?" Instead of resisting the collapse, you begin cooperating with it, not passively, not helplessly, but consciously, like a sailor who stops fighting the storm and instead learns to read the wind. Imagine, for a moment, standing at the edge of everything familiar, watching the old identity dissolve into the horizon behind you. It's frightening. Of course it's frightening. But notice, just beneath the fear, whether there's also something else. A pulse, a quiet aliveness, something in you that has been waiting patiently for the noise to finally clear. This is the beginning of individuation. The process Jung considered the central task of human life. Not becoming someone new, but becoming who you actually were underneath every adaptation, every mask, every compromise you made to survive. It is not a destination you arrive at and then stop. It is closer to a becoming that never truly finishes, on a life built less around who you're supposed to be for others, and more around who you actually are, moment to moment, choice to choice. This means learning to make decisions without needing everyone's approval first. It means tolerating the discomfort of disappointing people who only love the mask. It means building a life so aligned with your actual values that external validation slowly stops being the fuel it once was, because you're finally generating your own. None of this happens overnight, and none of it happens without grief. You will grieve the person you thought you were going to become. You will grieve relationships that cannot survive your honesty. You will grieve years spent performing a life that was never fully yours. Let yourself grieve it. That grief is not weakness. It's the closing of one chapter so a truer one can begin. And here, at the edge of everything we've explored, is the revelation this entire season has been building toward. Your breakdown was never your ending. It was the moment your real life quietly began. The confusion, the shadow, the loneliness, the pain. None of it was proof that something in you was failing. It was proof that something in you refused to keep living as someone you were never meant to be. The person who entered this storm will never be the person who walks out of it. And that is not a tragedy. That is the entire point. Because sometimes losing yourself is the only way you ever truly find yourself.